The revelations now televised. A platform for you and I. An outlook with full heart and clear eyes. Now, these are just my thoughts. Truth on how I feel on these topics I reveal. Please know my toll, I always keep it real. Can't face the word if you can't face facts. For your time, just open up your mind. That's it, just live, think big, now take that. With God in me, this here was made by design. Yeah, the revelation will be televised. REVELSations.
What's up, everybody, and welcome back to the REVELSations Podcast. It's your boy, Rev. Please subscribe, rate, and review wherever you get your podcast. Leave a comment on YouTube, hit the subscribe button, like button, thumbs up me, do all that good stuff, and let me know why you are rocking with the show. Just got done recording one of the best conversations I've ever had with a woman who is a part of my cohort as I pursue my doctorate. Her name is Elizabeth Jamison Dunn. She is a principal of a school in Chicago, and her and I embarked on a conversation about violence in communities and, more importantly, violence in schools. Elizabeth was able to educate me on a couple of things about that. We disagreed on some things, but at the end of it, honestly, she changed my mind, and I think she has a really good plan of how to turn our nation of violence around. So sit back, relax, and enjoy the show. But before we get into the conversation, please remember you can hit us up on any of our social media platforms at the REVELSations Podcast. That's on TikTok, Instagram, and Facebook. You can also email the show directly at revelationspodcast@gmail.com. Get ready, sit back, enjoy the show, and I'll holler at you when we're done. Okay, and welcome back to the REVELSations Podcast. I am joined by Elizabeth Dunn. She is a member of my cohort as we going on this journey to finish our doctorate in education. So, Liz, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
Good. So why don't you introduce yourself to the audience just as a person, and then after that, what do you do? How long you've been in education, and we'll get into the topic after that.
Sounds good. So I'm Elizabeth Jamison Dunn. I go by Liz. I'm originally from the South Side of Chicago. I love Chicago with my whole heart. I was raised by a single mom, have a baby brother, as well as an older brother and sister on my dad's side. I have always valued education. So I went to elementary school in Inglewood here, but I was fortunate to go to a magnet school called Whitney Young Magnet School for high school. And there I was just like really shocked by like the mass disparities I saw between what my cousins were getting at our neighborhood school versus what I got at Whitney Young. Went on to Howard University, and there I just knew I wanted to do something in the space of educational equity, especially given my own experience with education. So I joined Teach for America. I was a core member back in 2007. And, that has, it's very various opinions about that. But for me, I was fortunate to be placed at the school that I still work at. So I was a first year teacher at a charter school on the west side of Chicago. And that was also the year the school opened. So I got to be a founding teacher. Did that for a few years. Then I became director of instruction. And now I'm starting my 9th year as principal there. And so I love my school. I feel like it's my child. I don't have children of my own, but my school is kind of like my kid. It's been in my life for 17 years, and I've had a hand in a lot of the different initiatives and things we've done over the years. And so, yeah, I'm really passionate just about working in urban spaces and working with our children, our Black children in our community.
I love that. I love that. So you are a educationer extraordinaire. I love it. So I appreciate you joining the show. And we're going to talk about probably the most unfortunate topic that two people could talk about. And that is violence, especially school violence. People say we live in the greatest country in the world in the United States. And I'm like, right, but we also live in the most violent country in the world. We live in one of the most racist countries in the world. We know we have all these problems. And here we're not only here to expound on the issues, but maybe come up with some solutions, and just have two very educated people who both love education, who both love children, who both do not have children, right? See, right. This is the thing though. I think we're more special. The reason is because we don't have kids and we willing to do all this stuff for other people's kids.
Other people's kids.
Right. So it's not as if we are setting all this up. We are making this world a better place for our children. We're doing it for other people. So I'm gonna go ahead, reach back here, pat myself on the back.
Yeah, pat on the back.
Pat you,
I told they all mine.
Right. People say, do you have kids? I say, not in my house, but I teach 126 of them. So yes, exactly. That's how many high school ninth graders I have this year. So my experience is a little bit different. I've mostly been working in private schools. I know you're in charter school. I have worked in a charter school as well. And way back when, I'm gonna date myself a little bit. I believe it was my sophomore year in high school. There was, I was in school and I heard something that I had never thought I would hear before. And that was a school shooting that happened. Now, a lot of people remember the first one that really got national news, and that was Columbine. Yes, but I want to go back to this thing called Jonesboro in 1998. So actually, this was my junior year in high school, 1998. I graduated in 1999, and there was a school shooting, and I'm like, what happened? There were 5 people that got killed at Westside Middle School in 1998, and then Columbine happened in 1999, my senior year. I remember it like it was yesterday, and the videos and things like that. And I'm like, what in the world would possess kids to take a gun in school and just start randomly shooting people? And since 1998, 1999, we have had shooting after shooting after shooting after shooting. And, I live in Texas, but I'm in the States, and, they have the don't tread on me. And then they have the gun, and they're like, I dare you to come try to take it type of situation. And so there's a lot of guns. There's more guns in Texas than people. Right. And then you live in Chicago, and Chicago is infamous for the amount of gun murders per year. Right now, I think some of those statistics are sort of trumped up a little bit, if you will, just to make, to make it look bad. And I've noticed this, and I don't know if you did, but a lot of the statistics about gun violence in Chicago really start coming out when Obama was running for presidency, and people were trying to say, you can't control your own city and your own state. Did you notice the same?
I did. Because I feel like before it wasn't even something that we talked about at this level.
Right. But now it's infamous. It's infamous. So, we have all heard of school violence, and we've all heard of the mass violence. So I'm just going to run through some statistics, and I'm going to go all the way back to 2014. Now, for the audience, why I'm only going back to 2014 for these stats, myself and future Dr. Dunn, we're in a doctorate program, and they don't really allow us to use statistics that are more than 10 years old. So I'm going to start with 2014, go all the way up to 2023. And these are mass shootings in the United States. This is coming from BBC.com. In 2014, we had 273. Mass shootings are described as a shooting where 3 or more victims, there were 3 or more victims. These don't have to be people dead, but these are at least people shot. So in 2014, we had 273. 2015, 336. 2016, 383. 2017, 348. 2018, 336. 2019, 417. The year of COVID, which is amazing, 2020, we got all the way up to 610. The year after COVID, 2021, 690 mass shootings. 2022, 647. And I'm proud to report, this is going to sound weird, but in 2023, we are down to 476. Now, that's a lot of shootings. But we have dropped precipitously. Now the year isn't over. It's September. We got some time.
We still got a whole quarter of the year left.
But it seems as if, we're going down a little bit. And I just wanted to get your opinion on, what do you think is happening in the United States as a whole, before we get into schools, as why there's so much violence in general? What do you think?
I mean, the United States was founded on violence. I think it's a part of the foundation of this nation.
Absolutely.
I think some of, the looseness that we have in terms of gun control and different laws, and I'm not necessarily someone in the debate around should people be able to conceal carry, things like that, but it's something that in the United States, it is so foundational here for people to have guns. I was in South Africa recently and having a conversation with people who were in the actual military. And they asked me, like, have you ever seen someone shot? And I said, yeah. He was like, I'm in the military here and I've never seen someone shot.
Wow.
And
Wow.
that was a little eye-opening to me. And so I think that some things have become quite normalized here in the States. And because we aren't on the same page at a national level in terms of how do we keep people protected without necessarily having guns everywhere. Because even when I was in London? I forget what, but it was somewhere in Europe, and they were saying how the police don't even have guns.
Right.
Like,
Right.
you know, and
Yes.
that's standard to me. I expect the cops to have guns.
Right.
But because it's the mindset that there should never be an instance where this arises to the point of having to take someone's life. And it's just a part of the culture here. And so until the culture changes and the expectations we have around gun control and how we choose to deal with situations, I don't know if the way that the shootings go will change because
Right.
it has become normalized, unfortunately.
Normalized and especially school shootings I think that while I believe this, and this is how I feel, and a lot of people they heard me say this before and they get on me a little bit. I think every life is just as valuable as another life. I know I'm a teacher, and this is gonna sound crazy, but I don't think the child's life is more important than an adult life, right? But we as humans, we tend to have a little bit more empathy for when children are involved, and we have just had a ginormous amount of school shootings. So I live out of the country right now, and you don't even hear about that, right? You hear about people getting killed, that happens. But the kids, like, it's not even in their purview. It's not even something they think about. They only hear about it on the news, but you don't necessarily hear about it nationwide. So as we shift over to schools, and I agree with you, the country was founded on violence. The country was founded on racism. These are institutions. These are systematic things, right? Our Second Amendment right is the right to bear arms. Now, I'm a historian. I know why that was put in there. It was put in there not so that everybody could be armed, but because they didn't want a government to be able to control the people. So it was really the right to bear arms so that people can come up with a militia to fight against the government. But now we don't really need that, because I don't care how many handguns we have and automatic assault rifles, et cetera. We can't fight against the government. The government is too powerful. They have nuclear bombs, all of this stuff, right? So that's a little outdated. It probably needs to be changed, but that's not the topic of today. The topic of today is school shootings. Okay. So according to Education Weekly, which is a great website, I've actually used it in some papers that we've written for our.
I have too.
Yeah, it's great. It's fantastic. Yeah. In 2022, there were 51 school shootings that resulted in injuries or deaths, the most in a single year since Education Weekly began to track such incidents in 2018. And then, so that was 2022. Now we're in 2023. And in 2023, we have had 28. Now, people say, oh, that's down. Well, no. That's counting last school year. And we just started school. Like, we just got back. At least me.
Yeah, we started
3 weeks ago. Right. 3 weeks ago. So it's dangerous. And I couldn't imagine. And I talked to my friends about this. And you probably have nieces and nephews, friends, or whatever. I'm like, how do you send your kid to school thinking they might not come home? So how do you deal with that? Have you had those conversations? Also, have you had conversations with parents who worry about school violence as a whole, before we get into your specific story about what's been going on at your school?
Sure. And so with us, I think, so when I was a child, I remember when Columbine happened. I was, I think, in 8th grade or 7th grade. But for me as a school leader, it was Sandy Hook. That was like the one that kind of shook everything, because it was in the elementary school. We were talking about like 5 and 6 year olds. And so once that happened, I definitely, and I was in a position of leadership at that time. But we had staff members who were concerned. We had parents who were concerned. And some students who were old enough to understand what was going on were also concerned. And so as a school, we had to kind of take a proactive approach in terms of how can we prevent something like this from happening. So we actually invested a lot of money on the front end. So one of the things that we noticed is all of our classrooms had like keys to lock, but there was no way for a teacher to lock their classroom door. also had to look at our entrance, and so how people were able to come into our building. It was a little bit too easy at first. So we had to kind of redo the security at the front. We installed several cameras. We put in different locks so that it was a 3-lock system to even gain access to the building. They had to go through 3 separate doors. And just different things that honestly weren't a priority beforehand, but Sandy Hook was like a huge wake-up call. Like, hey, this could happen because it did happen. And we currently aren't equipped to manage a threat of that level.
Right.
And then CPS, like the district, they also put in some new requirements as far as like lockdown drills go, and like training our students and teachers on what to do if there is an active shooter situation, which is just, for me as leader, it's so sad that we have to spend time in professional development, spend time in our assemblies discussing what do we do if we feel threatened. But it's things that we've done. So, every year we do lockdown drills twice a year. We have Chicago Police Department kind of circulate the building with us, and they help us do a threat assessment to make sure that any spaces that could be vulnerable in the event of attack are protected. So yeah, it did impact us. Like, we had to make some real changes. And that was at the request of not only our families, but also the staff. Like, they're there too,
Absolutely.
So yeah, it was a lot.
So I'm one of those people that when something is really crazy and bad, I tend to smile. It's just one of my nervous things. So as people watch me and I smile as you say these things, it's not that I'm happy about it. It's just a part of how I react to some emotional things. So for those of you who don't remember, Sandy Hook happened on December 14, 2012 in Newtown, Connecticut, when a 20-year-old male killed 26 people. He also killed his mother. There were 27 deaths at the school, including himself. But he was killing elementary school kids, and it was very sad. And then you mentioned the money spent on schools. Well, there was a Michigan town that is spending $48 million on construction updates to help prevent school shootings at their schools. $48 million was designed to minimize school deaths, includes walls for students to hide behind, and a special lockdown system. And it is sad that we have to go do that. Now, when I was in Texas, I served as the director of operations at a charter school. And a part of my job was, do fire drills. Well, that makes sense. Do fire drills. And they were like, right. But now you got to have the police come here and the task force come here, and you got to do lockdown drills. And I'm like, wait, what? We got to do. So literally we had to go through and do lockdown protocol. And like you said, with those locked doors, et cetera, and the cop is coming through saying, you guys need to change this and that. A shooter could come through, and you just realize how vulnerable our staff, our students, the school is. Schools are not designed for protection from a person coming in there or a shooter already in the school without it. So that's in general. Now, I have you in particular, because we were having a conversation in class. Now we're getting to the meat of it all. We were having a conversation in class, and one of our classmates was talking about like school safety. And he mentioned the use of school resource officers. So for those of you who don't know, that's police officers at school. That's the popo in the school, armed in the school, which is crazy because I grew up in Champaign, Illinois. And my school, we had some fights, but nobody getting shanked or shot. It was just a fight. Like it was just a fight. There might even have been a brawl, but nobody was worried about getting killed. So we didn't have police officers roaming the halls. And he mentioned that. And a part of me, like as a person, I tend to, though I hate racism and sexism and all that, I tend to have some conservative views. I do. And then I have some liberal views. I wouldn't say I'm conservative or liberal. I try to be in the middle. And I understand like the school to prison pipeline, and I hate it. Right. And I understand that policing in schools is a real thing. And police tend to target people that look like me and you, especially our nephews, our sons, things of that nature. So to not have police officers in our school is great. But I have nieces and nephews who are in school, and I just want them to come home. So if it takes some police officers in the school to keep them safe, I just want them to come home. So we were talking about that. And then you mentioned something about not training our children to be incarcerated, training them to be prisoners. So can you speak to what you think about human resource officers, and then talk about some incidents that happened at your school and why you might think the way that you think?
Sure. So to start, I am at an elementary school, and our classmate was talking about a high school setting. So I do think there's some shifts, differences. And I went to a high school where we had like school security, but definitely not armed. And they definitely, it was only a few. It was like 2 or 3 for a high school of 2,000 plus. But for me in my elementary setting, like I said, I've been there 17 years and 9 years as principal. And we never had a security guard while I was principal. And one of the reasons why is, one, I was like, what would they do all day? There have not, like, seriously, I'm like, there aren't any things that are happening with our children that we are not equipped. Yes, our students have had some physical altercations, but we have been able to handle those with the staff that we have on hand. And then I also thought about just kind of the investment in terms of finances. Do I want to spend money on a person to just walk around the building in case something happens, but also to kind of create this space where our children feel like they are being policed? Or can I reallocate that funds towards social emotional health? I have 2 school social, and I have a behavioral health interventionist, and I have a dean and the assistant dean. So I have other members on my team who I feel can more proactively address some of the issues that a security guard or a police officer may address without necessarily creating a space where we're just being reactive. And it's like, oh, run out there and get it. But I felt it was other ways I could use that money. Now, I will say I hired a part-time security guard this year, but it's for traffic control. And so he doesn't start until like an hour before we get out of school, and he helps with after-school things. Once again, it's not like walking around my schoolhouse during the day, because that's just not the environment that we've wanted to create with our students. And we've been very intentional about kind of pouring into them, filling their cups, so that they'll make better choices besides bringing a knife or a gun or something like that. And I have had kids bring knives to school. I've had it happen on 2 occasions.
And how did you go about finding, or how'd you know that they brought a knife to school?
So the first occasion, it was a neighborhood event. So had some students from a different school come up to our school during dismissal to fight some of my children.
This is an elementary school.
It is.
So you got elementary school kids going to another school to fight some elementary school kids?
Elementary school kids, yeah. They were like middle school. So my school is K-8. So these two.
Okay. I'm thinking these are the babies. These are the babies. I'm like, wait a minute, the babies?
But the 8-year-olds like, what's up? No, they were like 12, 13.
Okay. Doesn't make it okay, but it makes it more explainable. Yeah, okay.
It does. I agree. So I can see why you're confused. Like, what? Like what they want? Who watching them?
It's jumping off with 3rd graders? Okay, the babies. All right.
They were 7th and 8th graders. And we had some students come up to kind of fight some of our children, and it was things that started on social media. So my dean and I were trying to intervene. And one of the young men had like a big piece of wood, like a 2x4, and he was trying to go over us to hit one of my 8th graders. Then I turned to my right, and my student had a knife in his hand. And he brought the knife because of the threats of the neighborhood students that he knew. Like, I knew they were coming. And so I actually kind of engaged in a struggle with that student, and I was able to get the knife out of his hand. I told him to run because now they really was trying to get him. And then he ran, and our one of our neighbors in our complex, they allowed him in the building. And so, because we were calling the police, and unfortunately we called the police over 30 minutes, nobody came.
Of course not.
So we had to just kind of deal with it on our own. And so I took the knife inside, and so that was like one instance where we found out someone brought a knife, but it wasn't brought out in the building. It was outside at dismissal. And then another instance, it was a 3rd grader. The knife was probably smaller than this. It was like a little kitchen knife. And we found out because his brothers tattletailed on him. So they told, like, He brought it, and I said, "Why would you bring this?" And he said he brought it because he didn't want nobody talking about him. He never pulled it out or anything. He got caught because his brothers told on him immediately.
His
But
brothers.
with that, yeah, his blood brothers. They live in the same house. They came to school and told their teacher,
Good.
like, so and so bought a knife to school today. So the teacher told me, and I went up to him. I said, and it was a kitchen knife. His grandma even messaged me later. She like, "That's my favorite kitchen knife. Can I get it back?" So I gave him the knife back. I said, "Tell him you're so bring to school."
Right.
But so in that instance, that student, because he did bring a weapon to school, we did have periodic checks of his bag because he had showed us that he was untrustworthy. And unfortunately, the student with the knife, the district moved forward with an expulsion for him.
Oh, wow.
And so he had to go to alternative placement. So that one was really, I boo-hoo cried through that whole thing because
it's unfortunate. He was, it's crazy how a lot of times in our youth, we're making decisions that might follow us for the rest of our life. So in particular, then you begin to tell a story about some violent incidents that maybe didn't happen in your school, but in a rougher neighborhood around your school, and it affected your school. So you've had, from my calculation from talking to you, 3 different shooting incidents around, at least 3. You looking like it might be more. It
was 3 I shared in class because those happened like during the day and had kind of like a direct impact on what we had going on in the building.
Can you talk about those where it might? I know for you it wasn't a school, a student coming into the building and shooting up the school, but even the neighborhood around, and there's some violence going on there, and it affects your building.
For sure. So the community that we're in does have some communal violence. It also has a lot of great things, and that's one thing that our school does try to do is be a light on our corner, because it's so much greatness there, but unfortunately it does get overshadowed by some of the violence. So my first week as principal, actually, we had a situation where there was a shooting outside in front of the school, and a bullet actually pierced through one of my classroom windows, and thankfully the students were in gym at the time, but 2 of the teachers were planning in the space. And so that was very difficult. It was my first week as principal. So I was like, help, I need an adult. I don't know what to do. But my network was there to help me through it in terms of the communication. And thankfully, nobody was physically harmed. But it was still like we found a bullet case in a box of headphones, like that, for our kids. So that was one incident, and we did have to, communicate to parents and let them know that all the students were safe. But of course, for parents, that was very scary. And then we had another incident when a community person was being targeted during our arrival, and a car kind of pulled up alongside them while they were dropping their child off. And after the children kind of got towards the building, they shot into the vehicle several times.
Wait, they shot into the vehicle, or the vehicle shot at the parent?
They shot into the vehicle that the parent was in.
Okay. Wow. Okay. Wow.
And so, and in that instance, his children saw it. And so he tried to pull off, and it was the whole thing. He ended up when he tried to pull off, a car T-boned him. It was 2 stolen vehicles that engaged this. He ended up he tried to get in the building. We wouldn't let him. But he kicked the door in. But we had already gone on lockdown. So I talked about lockdown drill. So once we heard the shooting, someone came to me because I was in the midst of doing my morning announcements. And my librarian was like, "Dunn, it's a lockdown." So I called the lockdown. So the school locked down immediately. So once he did kick his way into the building, all the classes was locked. Everybody was in a lockdown situation. And then me and my dean actually because I didn't know what was going on because I was in the room doing an announcement, but I encountered him in the hallway, and we kind of talked him into going back into the main office and not in my main hallway because he had been shot. So he was also bleeding. And then the police came and they were able to handle it. But that one was probably, to me, that was definitely the most jarring because it happened during a school day. It was 2 of my students' father who was And so we did. Thankfully, I talked about my social workers. See, in that instance, a security guard couldn't do nothing. But
Right.
my social workers, they came to me and we had just talked through how we can handle it with students. Because some students saw it, some parents saw it, like they had to lock down with us, and it was a shooting,
Right.
happening during arrival. And we ended up pulling our social work and cultural teams together, and we pulled the students into some assemblies, like different ones for K2, 3, 5, 6, 8. And we allowed them to talk about how they were feeling. We had support from the district that came out. So, we just really tried to support and wrap around our kids, because that was really traumatic for several of them.
Yeah.
And then for the 2 students specifically, they ended up spending the whole day at school.
They did what the whole day? They did what?
They spent the whole day, like they didn't get picked up. And so
Well, yeah, that was their dad. They got shot, right?
yeah.
Wow.
So he lived.
Oh, good.
But yeah, he lived. And so yeah, but so we had to, of course, like have the social work team work with them, make sure they feel good, trying to keep them updated, because the family were kind of dealing with the dad. And then from there we put safety plans in place and different things to help us feel safer. But yeah, as a school, those type of threats are what I'm more concerned about. And so we actually just last week we finished installing the bulletproof windows on our first floor to keep us protected in case there is some community violence.
Right.
But I also know that my children are the community.
Right.
And so that's why it's important to me that we are sowing seeds with them and giving them alternatives, so that one day it's not them out there shooting folk up when they dropping their kids off.
So what is your level of concern with, since it's community violence and these students are coming from the community that is so violent, what is your level of concern with your students then beginning to engage in the violence in a school shooting, perhaps in your school? I mean, you've had two knives. You've had at least two incidents like that. I remember you and I were talking the other day, and you said there was a school shooting. Somebody shot through the upstairs, and you were just like,
so you know what? I thought it was. It wasn't. It was when they was painting this mural, something hit the window. I meant to tell you that.
Okay, I was like, you was a little calm about that day. I was just like, you just used to it now. It's just all right. Like
I know.
But it's okay. So how do you deal with maybe the education part of educating your students? How do you keep that, even though it's a community, how do you make sure your students aren't the ones that's doing that inside of the building?
Yeah, so we've been very fortunate to have a lot of consistency when it comes to my staff. Like this year we retained like 98%, but over the last 9 years we keep the same team. I've had at least 90 to 95% retention with my staff each year, which I'm very proud of. It's great. We are like a family. And so one thing is that we've established consistency and stability for them. Like even if the rest of the world may be a little bit chaotic, like when you come in this space, you are going to get stability, consistency, safety, love. We also do retain our students. We have about 5 to 7% mobility rate each year, but most of our students come back. Even last year at graduation, we call them legacy scholars, scholars who've been there kindergarten through 8th grade.
Okay.
And of the 60 kids who were graduating, like 40 of them have been there since kindergarten. And so we keep our children. And so what we do is we try to be intentional about holistic education and spending time not just teaching them math, reading, writing, because those things are important, but also how to be good people. Like we are a leader in me school, so we talk a lot about leadership. Just yesterday, we had one of our retreat days. So we dedicate full days. We call them leadership retreats, where we do things like teach them about nonviolent communication. We talk to them about, we did yoga with them. We had students who were struggling with their identity. So we had people come in and talk about LGBTQ issues with our older students, because we had some students who identify as trans. But we also talk about restorative methods. We do team building. So we invest whole days in these things. We did vision boards. So right now, if you go on my middle school floor, the children have set goals and come up with like visions for themselves. So we try to make it so that they see like your life is so huge, you have so much to offer. And just making a space. I always say this, but I want a school where like everybody feel like they could shine. Just a little bit. So we have a lot of different clubs and organizations. We just had our organization meeting yesterday, and we have 30 clubs and organizations in an elementary school on the west side of Chicago. And it ranges from orchestra to the athletics to dance to anime club, yearbook. Like it's just a bunch of random things, but it's just giving them things to stay busy, but also to grow, because some kids aren't going to excel academically, but maybe you're about to kill it in media, or you're going to be amazing in orchestra. So we just want every child to like, you have value. Like, and if we don't have something here that matches your need, that's how the anime club got started. We had a bunch of kind of kids who like to nerd out on anime. They didn't have a space, so we started the club, and them kids every single week. And I don't know what they talking about because I'm not an anime person, but they love it. One time they had to meet in my office, and the way they was going at it, it's like, y'all have a space. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So
that's really
that's
good.
kind of what we're trying to address it.
Well, I like that. You're trying to make every student feel like they belong, and like you said, they have more to live for. It almost seems like when you, after a school shooting, and there's research on the individual that decides to take the lives of classmates or, you know, a random person, they feel like they're an outcast or they're on the outskirts of a community. They don't feel involved and things of that nature. So I think you guys are doing preventative measures. My uncle retired from the Urbana Fire Department as a fire marshal, and he would tell me the greatest way to put out a fire is make sure it never starts. So it looks like you're doing some things there, right? just to make sure it never starts.
Oh, seriously.
So with the fact that you've had a couple of shootings outside of your building and 2 potentially violent things in your building, as far as students bringing weaponry to the building, how do you feel about some schools now beginning to put metal detectors at the door, stop and search? Now, the stop and search, stop and frisk thing has not been really that good for Black people throughout the history of the United States, but I think in general, desperate times calls for desperate measures. So I'll just give my little viewpoint on it. I would be okay with schools putting metal detectors and things of that nature at the door, because most school shootings occur from people who go to the school, in the school. It happens, you know. You do have those where, like in Sandy Hook, for example, it was somebody who was not a student. He was a 20-year-old. They came from outside in. And you know, schools have a lot of easy access into the buildings. But how do you feel about metal detectors at the doors, checking bags of students and staff, you know, as they enter the building?
So we actually had a meeting earlier this year where we discussed that on my network side, and I am against using metal detectors specifically in elementary schools for students. I've done a little research, and I've actually found no research that shows that metal detectors actually do increase student safety. I think that is one of those things that helps people feel better. But for me, you know, that hasn't been something that I think would actually make our kids feel safer, because even the instances I told you, neither one of those knives were taken out during school. Like the violence I've experienced at our school, metal detectors, security guards, none of that would help. Like it's more so like the institutional racism that impacts our community that makes people think that these are the ways. And also, I was reading something about how metal detectors can also negatively impact a child's sense of safety, because they're like, oh, what's going on that we have to go through these metal detectors? I have to be searched. I have to have my things patted down. And I can't imagine making an 8-year-old walk through a metal detector. You know what I mean? Like I'm dealing with children. And when you were talking earlier just about like making sure that those types of things don't happen because students feel more supported, we also do early detection. So our staff is trained to recognize behaviors in students that could be indicative of something larger like mental health concerns, and we try to address those immediately, especially if anybody expresses like a suicidal or homicidal ideation. We have ways to address those things immediately, so that we are being proactive about helping our students get through it, because a lot of times with those students who are the ones who are shooting up the schools, there were plenty of signs that just went ignored, you know? So if you're able to identify those signs and actually do something about it, then to me, that's a better way of handling the threat of school violence versus making my Black kids at that, walk through metal detectors. It's slow things that, no, it's just something that I've not been on board with. The only space where I saw a potential to use them is when we invite outside people, because we have a huge auditorium.
Okay.
So we have discussed the door that the auditorium is at, having a metal detector there, because in that space is bringing the community in, and I love the community, so this is no shade, but it's people who we just don't know. So
Right.
we're bringing in people we don't know into our school community.
Mhm.
Then I feel a much greater need to try to protect our
Absolutely.
space. But when it's just my 520 beautiful children and my 75 team members, we're gonna protect each other, but in different ways.
I understand, and you're coming from the elementary school, and a lot of times the school violence is from older kids, high schoolers, and I think you're right. There's been a lot of signs. Now, I'm not going to blame teachers for students shooting up schools like that. I'm just not going to do that. I'm not into blaming other people. The person did it. They knew they were doing wrong. Nobody in their right mind thinks. And that's the thing. You're like, maybe they have mental health issues. I just know that some of the students that I have out of the country, they have mental health issues too, but it's not going and grabbing a gun and going to take the lives of people. I think that is going all the way back to what you said at the beginning of the podcast episode, where our nation is just built on violence. It is in the fabric of our nation. And I think it just plays itself out, and violence begets violence. And like Malcolm X said, the chickens come home to roost. It's going to happen. It's going to happen. So while I understand maybe not at the lower levels, at the high school levels, what do you think we can be doing along with those preventative measures to keep our kids from going? Because your kids, you're K through 8, you're sending your legacy students off to these high schools where more of the school shootings are happening. What can we do as educators as a whole? I know you have your building, but you're also an educator in general. What can we be doing to make sure our students are coming home? We're our parents aren't sending kids to school in a box that's a death trap, and they're not going to make it home safely.
You know what? We could send our kids to the mall and they don't make it home safely. We could send them to the grocery store, they don't make it home safely. I think that the issue of violence in America is not one that is just relegated to schools. I think that it gets a lot of attention because we, like you said earlier, is children.
It's children, yeah.
But honestly, the culture of America is violence, is racist.
Yeah.
There's so much generational poverty and institutional racism and things that makes it so that violence is a part of the fabric of this nation. And so one thing that I am a strong believer in preventative measures, but I don't think that it's something that schools can do alone. It comes down to housing, how are we redlining so that certain people can live in certain districts, poverty being stacked on top of poverty, food deserts. It's so many different things I feel that contribute to the violence that we see. And a lot of times school shootings get blamed on schools, but it's indicative of a bigger problem. It's just a symptom of this disease that has taken over our nation. And so I think that I can understand, honestly, in some instances with high schools, especially if there is a history of violence, why metal detectors might seem to be needed. But I don't think it's a problem that the teachers and principals can solve alone, because it's a much bigger issue and it's just playing out in our schools, because that's why all of our children are going. And so it's a lot. And that's why for me as an elementary leader and a middle school leader, I'm just trying to plant seeds that are going to help be on the front line of making some of those changes. Because I don't think even the kids who are bringing up, when I talked about the young man who bought the knife, he didn't want that violence. He felt he had no other choice. You know what I mean? He felt he had no other choice. And so it has to be a wraparound thing. It has to be the entire community involved. And we all have to kind of work together to solve some of these issues. And my mind goes towards just urban schools working in Black and brown spaces.
Of course,
because honestly, I've never been concerned about one of my children coming to the schoolhouse and shooting them up. And not saying that it would never happen, but that's not been my concern. But I am concerned about one of my babies walking home and something happening to them. I have had instances when I mean, I've been to several funerals of the alums that I've taught. I've been there 17 years. I just went to a funeral 2 weeks ago for a student
Wow.
that passed away. So
Wow.
I know that it has an
Wow.
impact.
Well,
And so,
I'm gonna give you some statistics because you were talking about the black and brown thing.
mhm.
I just went to Statstia, which is great, a great space. This is mass shooters in the United States by race and ethnicity as of 2023, August of 2023. So out of all the mass shootings we've had, 78% of the shooters are white. 26% of the shooters are Black, 12% Latino, 10% Asian, 5% other, 3% Native American, and 13% unclear. So I heard, I forget the man's name. It was several years ago when a lot of the mass shootings were occurring. And he said something to the effect of, I actually can eliminate most mass shootings in the United States and most terrorism in the United States. Somebody was like, how? It's like, eliminate white men and you can like make it illegal to be a white man in the United States. And he got a lot of flack for that. I really hope I remember his name before the end of the episode, but there's a lot of flack. There's a lot of media coverage that is put on people that look like you and me, that we are violent people, that we are the ones who are the most violent. But I just read you the statistics of shooters, and an overwhelming majority, 78% of these people who are doing these shootings where it's 3 or more victims, 78% of the shooters are white people. 78% are white people who are doing these shootings. So while we may be talking about metal detectors in schools of this nature, the statistics say that more than likely your shooter is not going to be somebody from a predominantly Black neighborhood, a predominantly Black school. These are more likely to happen in different neighborhoods. And just for an anecdotal story, on August 28th, there was a shooter in Jacksonville. My sister lives in Jacksonville, Florida. And this white man decided, he said, pretty much he don't necessarily like Black people. So he just went and started shooting people. Now he killed a couple of Black people. He shot a 52-year-old Black woman and a 19-year-old Black man and a 29-year-old Black man. Gunman identified as 21-year-old Ryan Christopher Palmeter left racist writings and things on his social media before the attacks. And I'm wondering what happened in that young man's life. Where were the programs for him that you have in elementary school? Where are the preventative measures? Something in a 21-year-old mind made him hate people that look like me and you enough to pick up a gun, and I'm just about to go on a random spree and start killing Black people. The young man who was in South Carolina several years ago, who went to the church, sat in that church for over an hour. These Black people praising the Lord, pulls out a weapon. Now it's time to die. Kills 9 Black people. And then the police take him to Burger King before they take him to the police. Like, okay, I don't want to get off on a tangent, but you're right. There is a racist component to it. And I think if we think about just putting metal detectors and or these human resources officers, whenever you hear about these things, they're mostly targeted toward urban schools.
They are.
But statistics are showing that isn't where the mass shootings in schools are occurring. And statistics show more than likely if there is a mass shooting, it ain't us that's doing it. We're just not. I mean, it's just the truth. We're just not doing it. So I wonder why. So I want to throw to you. Why do you think we're targeted, even though the statistics say we're not the ones that are doing these things?
Racism, period, point blank. And that's why when we were in that class, I asked a question like, what's the demographics of the student population that you service? We were talking about 25, 30 officers and harder to get into the school than it is to get into the airport. It's racism. Like when you look at Black and brown children, it feels we need to be policed and that we need to be constantly monitored. But yet when you go to the schools in the suburbs where it's much higher chance of a mass shooting happening, you see none of these different interventions put into place.
Yes.
It's because we are Black and we are brown. And a lot of us are lower socioeconomic level. And that's one of the reasons why I have refused to put certain things in my school. Because I'm like, I've been there almost 20 years, and there has been nothing that has told me that my children need to go through metal detectors and need to be frisked every day. Like, absolutely not. They need to be loved. They need to be supported. They might need some harsh discipline at time. But if the white folk out in Winnetka and in the suburbs are able to get their kids, to and through high school and into college without doing those things, we can't too.
Right.
On the west coast, south side of Chicago.
I agree. So I just think that sometimes we are the media plays a role in making it seem like we are the more violent people. And I'm not saying that we're not. I mean, 26% of the shootings is not. I don't want to act like the devil can be in anybody. So again, I think that we are painted as people who are the most violent. Again, the devil can be in anybody. I'm not just going to say it's not our problem, but I just want our kids to come home. I want all kids to come home. It's not just us. And I'm just, interested in talking to educators like you and figuring out what can we do, because I think it might start with a more educated populace. If we can get smarter children, if we can make smarter humans, and you are doing the emotional intelligence, nonviolent conflict resolution. Clearly, the young man in Sandy Hook didn't know how to handle himself in a nonviolent way. The young man who most recently in Jacksonville didn't know how to handle himself in a nonviolent way. So if we can begin to implore these type of preventative measures that you're doing at your school, maybe we can not only stop school violence, we can stop violence or slow violence in general. So what would you say if we had a bunch of educators listening now, right? And we were to say, okay, we want to stop not only school violence, but we want to stop violence in general. What would you say to those people about different programs that we can do in schools that can help kids, learn different conflict resolutions without picking up a gun?
For sure. I kind of live as an educator by Frederick Douglass quote, it's easier to build strong children than repair broken men. And so I always think about how do we sow these seeds? How do we build strong children? So one thing is I always say I equally value culture, discipline, social emotional learning as I do education. And I do equally value that. So even when we look at how are we training our staff, because that's kind of where you need to start. It's as the people who are in front of your children every day, what type of training are they receiving? So we have done things around mental health first aid. We have done things around culturally relevant teaching practices, restorative justice practices.
Yes.
As well as just looking at how are we regulating our own emotions when we are working with our students, because we're also giving them the example of how to deal with conflict and how to deal with frustration. So starting with your staff, I think is one of the first things that you need to do to make sure you guys are on the same page with how you manage your students when they are showing struggles, because they're going to struggle. They're kids.
Yes.
But we need to love them through that. And then secondly, I would say develop some school-wide systems and structures so that social emotional learning is a part of how you manage your school. One of the big things that we had to do is we actually got rid of out-of-school suspension, which was a huge thing. Because prior to that, if a kid fought or any type of extreme disrespect, automatic OSS. And what we noticed is the same kids are getting a suspension. So clearly it's not working. And so we decided we were going to get rid of exclusionary discipline practices and really just invest in how are we restoring relationships that are harmed. And we saw a significant decrease in behavioral referrals after implementing those. And first people were oh, they're going to fight all the time because they're going to say, I can't get suspended. And that didn't happen. It was the opposite. Students were responsive to some of the things that we put in place. And we're really big on having restorative conversations and stuff like that. So now they'll ask can I have peace circle with so and so, and we even do peace circles between students and adults. We do peace circles student to student. I facilitated peace circles between two adults who might be having struggle with working together. So just making that a part of your culture. Like, here is a place where we are allowed to make mistakes, but I'm going to show you how we manage those mistakes. And we're also going to talk about emotional regulation. One thing we recently started is we teach executive functioning skills to our students who, at first it was the academic probation. They didn't hit 2.0, but we weren't really doing anything outside of penalizing them. And so I'm like, let's actually give them some skills to help them get off probation. So they have executive functioning classes, and they have a advisor who they work with twice a week to help them to stay on track. And so just being like really intentional about programmatic things that you do in your building to try to address those subsets of your population, as well as the entire school, as it comes to like emotional regulation, as well as giving them opportunities in which they are able to like shine and show off different ways that they're talented.
I love what you were saying about, teaching the whole child, and it's not just about reading and writing, and you're making sure the students feel like they're included, and you've taught your staff members to notice when a student is on the outskirts, notice it early. And you said something in your last answer that I want to touch on before we close, and you talked about changing the culture, and our culture is violent. In the United States, if you don't like something, you hit it, right? Like that, like that's pretty much knock it down, beat it up, shoot it. If you like, sort of seems like it is in today's world. So you're trying to change it from the grassroots, from like at the beginning of life at elementary school. And I deal with high school students, so I need you to keep doing what you're doing. So by the time they get up to me at the grown level, that they can handle it. And I think you're correct. If we have these preventative measures, if we have these programs in place, I love what you talked about the peace circle, conflict resolution, because at the end of the day, we all just want to live. We all want to come home, and there has to be some reason that Americans, when we know the reason, it's built on violence. Americans, when they don't like something, it turns into a violent altercation, but it doesn't necessarily happen other places. And I think you hit it on the head when you talked about culture. And how can we change the culture? It sounds like to me, you all are actually changing the curriculum in your school. It's not just we're going to teach math, history, English, a foreign language, PE, etc. No, our curriculum is changing. Curriculum is what we're teaching in school. We're teaching emotional intelligence. We're teaching conflict resolution. We're teaching life skills that is going to help our students be the best that they can be. And that's what we need. So we need a total revamping of the school system. And maybe, and I think you've actually changed my mind here about, because I'm all for metal detectors. Like, again, I just want to live. I just want to come home. And maybe there's a happy medium of, let's put the metal detectors in now at the high school level, especially, so I can get home while you're teaching the young kids the conflict resolution. So by the time they get to high school, we don't need the metal detectors and we don't need the human resource officers. Because I think, again, going back to what I said about my uncle in the fire department, the best way to, put out a fire is to never start one. And it sounds like that's what you are doing at your level. And I really, really appreciate that. You're making my job easier. You're making our lives safer. So thank you so much. I bow to you. I appreciate the fact that you are doing these great things at the grassroots level, making sure these students are emotionally prepared to handle crazy things that may come up. I'm hurt for the young man who, he didn't choose violence, but he brought the knife because he was fearful for his life. And because of that, he got expelled. He didn't pull that knife out on any classmates, on any teachers. He was being attacked. But the rules say you got a knife, you got to go. One of those situations, especially if you brandish the knife. And as a young black man, as a young man, he's now marked with that record that's going to follow him to high school or whatever. Why were you in an alternative school? Well, there's a story behind that. And if we can prevent those things, so if we can prevent the other young men from the other school to have social emotional intelligence, to not choose violence, then all these things would be prevented. So future Dr. Jamison Dunn, I appreciate you. I do. Thank you so much. We have been trying to schedule this for a little while. Life be life, and know you finally shared some of your time with me. I'm so grateful for you. Do you have any closing remarks about this or anything else that you might want to share? Any nuggets? Because you've dropped so many nuggets on it. You changed my mind about it. I'm like, okay, no more pictures. Let's do this thing. So anything else you want to say before we close?
Tim, just thank you so much for bringing me on here. I appreciated this conversation because you pushed my thinking as well. And I just think it's important that all of us just really work together because, like I said, this is not something that one person can do. We are all a part of the solution. And I think that we just got to sow great seeds. We have to really help our children to be the best they can possibly be. And I'm going to use this quote from Hamilton, but he said, a legacy is planting seeds in a garden that you never get to see. And that's kind of like how I see the work we do every day. We just planted seeds, and hopefully one day, it might not be now, it might not be in our lifetime even, but we see significant change when it comes to violence in America, especially within our schools.
Yeah, because right now the seeds, not that you're planting, but these other people are planting, are rotten, and they're growing up into these terrible kids in high school. But I'm joking. So we're going to close. So again, thank you everybody for listening to the REVELSations Podcast. Future Dr. Jamison Dunn, I appreciate you. For all of you who are listening, please subscribe, rate, and review wherever you get the podcast. You can follow me on all the social media networks at REVELSations Podcast. That's Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. And I will holler at you guys next time. I am because we are. Peace. What's up, everybody? You just got done listening to a conversation I had with Liz Jamison Dunn. I enjoyed the conversation immensely. I think Liz is doing wonderful work at her school and trying to prepare the youth and change the violence in America starting at a young age. If we can get the people to have more emotional intelligence, more resources and tools to get out their anger, get out their frustration, and smart, intelligent, and wise emotional coping skills, and how to not act violently when they're feeling upset, oppressed, angry, or what have you, I think the world could be a better place. Originally, I didn't agree with Liz. I didn't. I thought that, we should be armed to the teeth at school. Not necessarily teachers, but school resource officers and metal detectors, etc. But the way she explained how her school is going about keeping the students, teaching the students, I should say, to not act in violent ways, that is going to lead to less school violence, less school fights, less school shootings, because she's teaching them at a young age how to deal with their anger issues, how to have non-violent conflict resolution. So, Miss Liz, I appreciate you. You did a wonderful job. You changed my mind, which is hard to do. Hopefully, we can get those numbers down that I shared during the podcast on the mass shootings, the shootings in school, because it's just sad and it's violent and it's scary and it's hurtful. And we all just want to get home safely. Anyway, thank you for listening. Please subscribe, rate, and review wherever you get your podcast. You can contact us on all of our social media networks, as you can see it on the lower third on the YouTube channel. That is the REVELSations Podcast on IG, Instagram, and TikTok. You could also contact the show directly, just REVELSations Podcast at gmail.com. Thank you for listening. I am because we are, and we'll holler at you next time. Peace.